Tell me about, where did you grow up?
I actually grew up in Lanesboro, Mass., but I was born in Pittsfield, Mass., in a house that my father built down on 28 Marion Avenue.
And what kind of a childhood do you remember?
I had a wonderful childhood. I had 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters, and I hear all this sibling rivalry and all these kids fighting. Never happened in our house, and I can only guess that Mother and Daddy just didn't allow it to happen before we were 2 years old or so. So we just were a family that were just thoroughly enjoyed one another.
What did your father do?
Daddy was a building contractor. As a matter of fact, probably the thing that might be recognizable to people in this area is up on top of Greylock Mountain is a place called Bascom Lodge. And he won the bid for building that thing back in the 30s. And he did it with all inexperienced labor. They were the CCC boys, you know, the old Civilian Conservation Corps. And so he was already very proud of the fact that he was able to put that together. And it's still in functioning up on top of Mount Greylock. I don't know whether you've been there or not, but it's an interesting place to go.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to Pittsfield High School. Even though I lived up in Lanesboro, I had to either get there by bus, but actually my girlfriend's father had a 12-cylinder Packard. And she would stop and pick me up in that Packard, and we'd take that to school. And then one day, she stopped and said, "Okay, Burr," my middle name was Burr, and everybody called me by that in those days. And she said, "It's your turn, you're gonna drive." Well, luckily I was an observant kid, so I knew how to drive.
How old were you?
Probably 16.
And that's where you became introduced to airplanes, right? Around that time?
Oh no, when I was a little kid, airplanes, well, when I was a little kid, Daddy built a glider. We had been to Cape Cod, and there were some Germans there that had a glider club. And matter of fact, I still have the little ticket where they punched all his lessons out around it. And he came home to Lanesboro and built a glider and used to fly it out of the backyard. His pals would come up, yank the shock cord, they'd go flying off into the air down to the bottom of the hill, and they'd drag it back up and do it again.
Your father was quite a guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, yeah. I had good parents. They were great parents.
Is it your father's influence that got you interested in engineering?
Not really. By the time I was time to go to college, all the girls were all going to go to, most of them were going to go to Skidmore. I had one friend who was going to study English and went to New York. But for the most part, the girls went to Skidmore to study English. And that just didn't do much for me. And so Mother and Daddy said, "You know, it's time for you to go to college." And I said, "I don't want to go to college." And they said, "Why not?" And I just thought it would be boring. And so I had a teacher in high school who was actually a friend of Daddy's. He was the vice principal. And
what was his name?
Mr. Goodwin. Boy. And anyhow, he was the one that ended up saying, "Have you ever thought about engineering?" But I made a list of everything, careers that could be, and I told him, I went over the list. No, I didn't want to be a secretary, not a nurse. Blood bothers me, and all of these things. And he said, "Oh, but there's no engineering on that list." And I don't know whether Daddy put him up to it or whether that was his own idea, but I was in a lot of his classes with all guys, you know, because I took all the math courses, and I took celestial navigation instead of study hall in his class. So I think he kind of had an idea that I might like engineering. So it really came from the vice principal of the high school.
And how'd you pick RPI?
Well, there was no place a girl could study engineering, to my knowledge, at that time, although I've since learned that I guess at Cornell I could have, but I wasn't aware of it. So I wrote to the 2 schools that I thought were best, to RPI and to MIT. And I simply asked them if they could recommend a school where a girl could study engineering. They both sent me back applications, and they both accepted me. I chose RPI because I thought I was a very shy, introverted girl, and I'd be more comfortable in smaller classrooms. And I also felt that RPI had a better undergraduate school, and MIT's strengths were mainly in the graduate school. That was my opinion. Whether it was justified or not, I don't know.
So you came to RPI and in 1945?
45. with a bunch of GIs coming back from World War II. They were nice guys. I think that had a lot to do with how easy it was for me in school, because they were married, they had kids, they were very serious about their educations, which they might not have done had it not been, you know, for the GI Bill.
Were there many women at the time at RPI?
A handful.
Any studying, you were studying chemical engineering?
Yes. Right? No, later on a girl transferred up from CCNY, I think it was, and did her last year at RPI, so she ended up with a degree, but she graduated in 47, I think it was. But I didn't have any girls in my classes, no. Somebody once said to me, when did you first discover that you didn't look like the other guys? And you don't notice it when you really don't notice it.
You graduated in 49.
49.
And what was your plan, your career plan at that point, before you got a job?
I don't know that I've ever. I'd like to tell you that I always had this vision of where I was going to be, where I am today. I never had any of that. I just always just wanted to do whatever was interesting to me.
So the following year, you went to work for GE.
Yeah, I did.
1950.
Actually, I joined them in 1949, but I elected not to go to work till it was over Christmas and after the first year. I actually came to the research laboratory and interviewed there, and I interviewed the general engineering laboratory too. Were
they looking for women at that time?
No. That was before. Especially, I didn't look like an engineer, and that caused some problems in getting accepted at GE. But I persevered, and here I am.
So you went to work at R&D in
Yes.
1950?
Mm-hmm. I did, and there were a number of places around. I guess some of them were submarine projects, I think, and then this was. Nuclear energy was the really up-and-coming thing at that time. And what was the forerunner of CAPL, it started out at the research laboratory, was actually under Kenneth Kingdon and was a research lab endeavor. And so that's what I chose to do, was to work in nuclear energy. And all my life I did that. I would switch from, after I'd been in some particular area for 2 or 3 years, and there was a new up-and-coming area, I would put my heat transfer and fluid flow expertise to use, and I think the next thing I did was guided missiles.
Now, the following year, 1951, you got married. You graduated from RPI in 49, went to work for GE in 50, and got married to Rollin Fitzroy in 1951.
I didn't want to get married that young. I didn't want to get married till I wanted to work 5 years, and then I was going to get married.
When did you meet Rollin?
Actually, while I was still in school. He was dating one of those girls that lived in the same house that I did, who was a couple of years ahead of me. She was an electrical engineer, and when she graduated, she went to work for Rollin at GE here in Schenectady.
Now, he was at Union, right?
No, he was working.
No, but I mean, didn't he go to Union?
He went to Union. He graduated from Union in 43, yes. And so she came into her inheritance, and the first thing she did was went out and bought a Chrysler convertible with a plaid lining. And of course she didn't know how to drive, so Rollin was teaching her to drive. And where do? You go back to school where, the girls are who you lived with. And it was a white knuckle ride. I remember that.
Do you remember what your first reactions to Rollin? It seems to me you're quoted somewhere as saying, eventually, around the time you got married, you described your relationship as like 2 peas in a pod.
Oh, we always were like 2 peas in a pod. That's what really got me to get married long before I intended to. I was, 23, I guess, at the time. And that was not my intent. But I thought, don't be a dummy. Where else would you chance would you have of running across someone he's extremely bright, And I really enjoy that kind of relationship with him. And I decided that I shouldn't let a good bet go by. And so I got married before I intended to.
That must have been an incredible 3 years. 49, graduate, 50, get to work for GE, 51, get married. What a tumultuous 3 years.
My whole life has been like that. I'm always doing something that's interesting, a new thing or whatever. You know, I just went to school to study engineering because I wanted to do something that I thought was fun. I hate to tell you, but I thought it was fun.
Now, is that what got you interested in nuclear energy?
Just because that was the up-and-coming technology thing that I would want to work on. I guess I'm always looking forward to what's the next new thing coming along.
You worked on what had to be cutting-edge technology at the time, heat transfer from the core of a nuclear...
Right, right. And I was doing shielding as well with the physicists across the hall. They tolerated me. Physicists tend to, at that time, feel that they were a little bit better than the engineers.
This was at the R&D Center, right?
This was at CAPL, the Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory. By then, it split off and became an entity of its own. It was run by General Electric, but it actually was a government entity run by the Atomic Energy Commission.
So you worked at CAPL when it was part of R&D?
Initially, before it became CAPL, but only for a very, very brief time. And then I was sitting out in a construction shack. They were building CAPL. It wasn't finished built yet. And there was still a construction shack there. And there was potbelly stove, and a guy named Bucky came in every morning and put wood in the stove. And about 3 of us, I guess, sat out there waiting for our clearance. We had a Q clearance, waiting for our clearance. And as I said, they were still building. And the thing that was fun about Bucky was he was a farmer. And so he would come in some mornings with fresh eggs and cook them on this potbelly stove for us.
Now, was that when Rollin, your husband, worked with the Manhattan Project?
No, the Manhattan Project, Rollin graduated in '43, and that's when they recruited him to be an undercover agent, and so he worked 43 to 46, and so that's before my time.
Now, what does that mean, he was an
kid.
undercover agent? What?
He was actually, well, it's a very long story. It's really a clandestine story of how they recruited him and got him. He was actually in the military. He had signed up while he was still a college student, and they took him to Oak Ridge and sent him into one of the buildings when Oak Ridge was still just a mud hole, and said they thought there was some sabotage in there to Rollin, and what did he think? And he came back and said, no, it's not sabotage. And the guy said, what do you think they're doing there? And Rollin said, I think they're separating U-235 from U-238. And the guy said, ooh, we can't let you out of the country. And so they sent him to Berkeley to work in the laboratory with Oppenheimer and E.O. Lawrence in trying to improve the yield of fissionable material for the bomb.
Now, if that sounds familiar to people, it's what Iran is doing right now that's upsetting a lot of people, right? They're learning to separate.
Yeah, yeah, probably is.
So he knew how to do that long ago.
He was, yeah, if you asked him, he would say it was dumb luck. He didn't have anything to do the night before, and he went to the library, and so he was reading up on nuclear fission. And said, how did you know? And he said, oh, there's nothing coming in, nothing going out. There's some gauges. And I talked to the operator, and she said, what are you doing? She said, I'm keeping the ratio at 14 to 1. I think it's 14 to 1. You can check up on me. And so then he immediately knew what it was that they were doing. Now, I wouldn't have known. I'd been a dummy, probably. Rollin didn't really work at Oak Ridge. He just went to Oak Ridge, and when it was still just a mud flat, they were just... that was really sort of a test. They had already essentially recruited him. That's quite a story. They put him on a train, and then the train went on a siding at night, and somebody tapped on the screen and the curtain and said, come on, get up. And it was Lieutenant Colonel, and he was a private. He should have he should have tumbled to that right then, that he was somebody special.
I have about an hour of tape of Rollin. Remember when I...
It's an hour and 40 minutes. Rollin was an exceptionally good agent, and he taught me some of his tricks, because he went to school to learn to be an agent, how to pick locks. He had his own little lock picking kit, which is illegal. He had a car with untraceable license plates, all of that kind of stuff. And
who trained him? The CIA?
Somebody in the Army somewhere. Once they fingered him, I call it fingered him. I asked him how he got fingered, and he was at Ohio State University for some kind of a course or something, and there was a professor there who asked him if he wanted to work with him in the summertime, because the course had gotten out of whack in terms of timing. And Rollin thought, gee, that was more fun than just hanging around doing calisthenics, and so he worked with this guy in the lab who was working on nuclear energy, and I suspect at least, that that's the guy, that professor is the one that fingered Rollin to be picked up to be used. But in more recent years, his CO there was actually an office in Oakland nearby that was undercover office. It was a magazine subscription place. If somebody came in to get a magazine, they took the subscription, mailed it in. But there were guys in the back who were monitoring phone taps, a guy who could crack safes, a guy who was an FBI man who tailed people. E.O. Lawrence's chauffeur was former FBI agent. That sort of thing was going on.
Now, when he was undercover in the Manhattan Project, did he ever come up with any spies or any...
Oh, yeah. In later years, we had some reunions, and that was what I was going to say about the guy. After I had written Rollin's obituary and he read it, he said, I didn't know all these things about Rollin. And I said, that's why he was such a good agent, and his cover was never blown, because Rollin just didn't talk. And so he was really quite impressed with the things that Rollin had done and that he didn't even know about, and that's because that's what made Rollin a very, very good agent. And no, he had to do things like this. There were some cases were scary for him too, for fear somebody'd shoot him. Because he had to do burglar kind of stuff. And mainly, he had a card. He went to communist meetings.
Really?
Yeah. Matter of fact, the Russians had exact duplicate of our plans of the bomb, and if they'd gotten it built first, they'd used it on us, don't you? And so he went to these things and was not very impressed with the morals of the Oppenheimers and whatnot out of this world, because he'd go to their parties and said all they thought about was sex, sex, sex. So I guess they were a wild bunch.
But all of this undercover work was in this country, right?
Yeah, this is in Berkeley at the university. He was working as a physicist. I've got his papers. I applied for them and got them, and he's listed as an employee of the university as a physicist working with E.O. Lawrence.
But he was really an undercover agent for the Army.
Yep, he was in the Army in civilian clothes. Matter of fact, when he was in Oak Ridge, they already had fingered him by then. They told him to send his uniform home and have his mother send him civilian clothes, which they did, and the mailman thought he had died in the war because his Army uniform came back. Their mailman thought he was killed. They never knew that he wasn't killed. The mailman never knew that. He just assumed he was killed, and so...
What aspect of nuclear were you working on?
I just making sure that the thing didn't melt down, in the core, doing heat transfer in the core. That was for a liquid metal cooled reactor for the Navy. They were all Navy, and they're not liquid metal cooled now.
That was the original power plant for what was the name of the sub now?
I don't remember the name of the sub. I hate to tell you.
They used some kind of sodium liquid?
Yeah, I think it probably was NAC, but I'm not sure. I really don't remember.
To transfer the heat from the core
from the core to some coolant liquid so that the thing didn't melt down, yeah.
So here
But I wanted to go down, usually if you're working on something, you like to go see where it's going to go and how it's going to fit and all that stuff. And I wanted to go down to Groton and go on a submarine, and I wanted to dive, you know me. And they wouldn't let me.
You never got to do that.
I'd be, oh, girl aboard, bad luck. Jinx.
Did Rollin get to do that?
I don't know. He didn't work there then. He was he was already on Project Hermes, on the rocket project, which I left Capitol to go join the rocket project. Yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Wasn't that the project that Werner von Braun from Germany was a part of?
Not the one here. This was called Project Hermes, and it was run by Dick, can't quite remember.
But he visited.
But we you know how you see these big things down at Canaveral? Well, right up here at Malta had a test station where you had stationary rockets held, and then a big bucket of water down below, and you fired the things. And I was working to make sure that the fuel and the oxidizer ran out. In those days, we used liquid oxygen and alcohol. We used alcohol because that's what the Germans did, and that's what the Germans did because they had trees, but they didn't have much petroleum.
Well,
so this is the follow-up on the V2 missiles, the German missiles.
Von Braun visited here, I know that.
Yeah, well, probably, perhaps there.
In fact, wasn't that...
Rollin was doing the inertial guidance on it, and I was doing the heat transfer.
Isn't that area at Malta that you're describing, wasn't that a copy of a similar place in Germany?
Well, it could be a copy of Peenemünde.
Peenemünde, yeah.
Very likely, you know. It was just a test stand. When I went up to see how my stuff was doing, there'd be a big klaxon horn that would blow, and they'd go over the PA system and say, "Woman on the base!" Because it was summertime, and Rollin said, "Oh, that's because the guys, it's hot, the test stand and everything, the guys run around in shorts." And it wasn't until recent years it occurred to me that he meant undershorts. I thought, what's wrong with guys in shorts? I think he meant they just simply disrobed because it was such a hot job in the summertime, being around one of those test pits.
No. It's called ASME.
ASME, American Society of Mechanical Engineers, but now we're called ASME International, I think, because we have groups in all around the world that are part of the society.
You know, you were the first woman president of ASME.
I was
right?
the first woman president, mainly because of everything that I had done along the way, the jobs that I had held. I held the public relations things in Washington. As a matter of fact, I started that, the public information. I was the very first vice president of public information in Washington, and had gone through all the chairs, and I guess some of the guys just decided, hey, it's Nancy's turn. And amazingly, I never thought it would happen. You know, I didn't think we were quite out of the dark ages yet. And Rollin said, did I want him to go? And I said, no, it's off. I'm really flattered that they've asked me to be a candidate, but I'm never going to make it. Don't bother to come. And he wasn't there. So he wasn't even there when it happened, because I never thought it would.
When you were voted in.
Yeah.
Now, why should the average person care about mechanical engineers?
Golly, we're what makes everything go. You got to have engineers that take ideas that are new ideas and make them into practical applications for just all sorts of things in your everyday life.
For example?
Golly, I don't know. You've caught me on that one, other than to say gas turbines for airplanes or nuclear reactors. Let's see, what else did I do? I worked on television picture tubes. What else did I work on? Space satellites. Did work for Philadelphia for the re-entry systems people. Just anything. Well, and appliances too, major appliances.
How about
they all have heat transfer problems.
How about automotive?
Tend not to be too much automotive, or at least nothing that I ever got into. There were some guys that were diesel guys, but mainly that's the Society of Automotive Engineers, which is akin to mechanical engineers. But I never worked on... I worked on my own car, my very first little sports car. I did all the maintenance myself. The hydraulic system was starting to leak. When you stopped at a light and you put the clutch in, pretty soon it would start to engage. And so I took it home and took it apart and rebuilt it. One of the guys found out I had rebuilt the hydraulics for my clutch and my brake and wouldn't ride with me.
So that didn't faze you?
No, it needed fixing and I just did it. Rollin made me some special blocks to put the car up on, so there wasn't any danger of a car falling on me.
Is there anything about
But he never told me not to do it either.
Is there anything about your career that you would do over again if you had a chance?
Gee, I don't know. I just sort of went along willy-nilly, just having fun. And I was only going to work 5 years as long as it was fun. And I worked 38 because I just liked doing it. There's just so many interesting things out there in the world to learn about.
When did you retire?
1987, 20 years ago, 22 years ago.
It seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
Yep. Because I stay active. I stay active in my technical society. And one of the feathers in my cap was to be elected to the National Academy of Engineering. That's a real feather in my cap. They're a bunch of high-powered guys. And I try to be an active participant in that, to sometimes served on committees of the National Research Council when there are questions the government has about technical issues and they want a committee to decide what's the real technical story. And so it's useful stuff. And so I keep on doing it.
I hear you're doing all these really exciting scientific things and then you retire. How do you replace that excitement in your life?
I don't know. It hasn't stopped, as far as I can tell. I still fly, and even though I am not in the left-hand seat, I still just like to do all the same things I ever used to do. And here at this place, I'm the plumber, the carpenter, the electrician. I run the place.
It's a big house.
It's a big house. It's a really big house.